Welcome everybody to this junior archaeologist program as part of the OI Explorer summer program series. I'm really excited to have you all here. My name is Calgary and I'm the youth and family program manager at the OI. Charlie is going to be helping out today. So they are the new facilitator this summer. They'll be assisting in the meeting. So we are going to be talking about archaeology today. And I bet a lot of you already know some stuff about archaeology, but before we get started talking about it, I want to find out a little bit of what you all know about archaeology. And you'll be able to see these two questions here. So you're gonna take your scrap paper and then I would just draw a line right down the middle of it. And then on one side, you're gonna answer the question, draw or write what you think of when you hear the word archaeology. So take just 1 or 2 minutes, draw or write whatever you think of on the left side of your paper. So if you can't think of anything, that's okay. Just whatever comes to mind. And this is really just for yourself to kind of get thinking about archaeology. Maybe you've read a book or seen something in a movie. All right, take maybe 10 more seconds, wrap up whatever notes you're making. It's okay if you don't quite get everything down, it's just a little bit of a warm up. All right, and then now we're gonna switch to the other question. So that is draw or write what you think an archaeological site might look like. So what comes to mind when you think of an archaeological site? Do a quick sketch or write a quick list of descriptions. And for the site, like maybe what does the landscape look like? What things are people finding? Who's working there? What tools are they using? And take maybe 20 more seconds to finish that up. Again, it's totally okay if you didn't get all of your thoughts down, just sort of getting started. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing. And now if you wanna maybe put in the chat something that you thought of for that first one. So what comes to mind when you think of the word archaeology? If you wanna put that in the chat. And then if anybody would like to share their drawing talking with us, you can raise your hand and we can call on somebody. I see some gods, mummies, Egypt, explorers, dinosaurs. Awesome. All right, and then dinosaurs, fossils, and artifacts. Awesome. How about an archaeological site? What comes to mind when you think of an archaeological site? I see shovels, brushes, broken pots, sandstone and rocks and pickaxes, diamonds, ancient stuff, tombs and pyramids, death masks, mummies. Awesome. So I think we have a lot of idea of stuff that's really ancient. We've got mummies, adventures, big buildings. Very cool. All right, so now that we have a little bit of an idea of what we know about archaeology, let's take a look at what archaeologists do. All right, so I'm gonna share my screen. Okay, so what do archaeologists do? Oops, sorry, click here. Okay. All right, so when archaeologists work, they take a series of steps. And these steps might look familiar to some of you if you've taken a science class. You might have seen these called the scientific method. So archaeologists are scientists. They're trying to figure out answers about how people lived in the past by using science. So they're not just making random guesses. They're not just adventurers, kind of, like Indiana Jones. They're really focused, trying to figure out in a systematic way how ancient people lived. So let's get started with that. So first, we're going to ask a question. And archaeologists like to ask questions about artifacts. So an artifact is, we're going to just say anything that's made, modified, or used by a human. So archaeologists are trying to learn about people, and what better way to learn about people than by looking at their stuff. So notably, in that definition, we're not saying that artifacts have to be ancient. So some artifacts might be relatively modern, some could be thousands of years old. So let's take a look at this first artifact here. Whoops, sorry. All right, so we're gonna take a look at this thing, and we're gonna try to come up with a couple good questions about it. So we're gonna call a good question anything that starts with what, why, who, or how. So those questions are not just yes or no questions, they can help us really dig in. So in the chat, why don't you guys put in some questions that you can come up with about this? So maybe take 30 seconds, try to think of a couple good questions, and then put one in the chat. So I see a question, who is on the penny? Oops, sorry, zooming out. Who is on the penny? Why is he on the penny? That's a great question. Why is a penny worth 1 cent? Good question. What is 1 cent? All right, we see somebody knows it's Abraham Lincoln. Awesome. What is the penny made of? What's on the back? Awesome. So there's some questions about this that we can ask that maybe we know the answers to, like that this was Abraham Lincoln. But you'll notice his name is not anywhere on this penny. So it's possible that archaeologists 1,000 years in the future would not know who this is, and they would have to do a little more investigating. All right, so now we're going to take a look at a more ancient artifact. We're gonna switch gears. So here is a much more ancient artifact. And now think if you want to ask the same questions about this, or if you have different questions now that you want to ask about this ancient artifact. So someone asked, is this Tut? So yes, this is King Tut's death mask, or his mummy mask. But what questions do you have? Yeah, what is on his head? What is it? That's a great question. I see we have a lot of fans of King Tut here. What is it made of? That's a great question. Can tell us about how much value people put in this. Who is he? So that's the same question we could ask about the penny, right? But we can ask it about this ancient artifact too. Why did they make mummy masks? Awesome. These are all awesome questions. All right, so we're gonna keep going, but you'll have plenty of opportunity to ask questions later of your own archaeological investigation. So next after that, archaeologists will make a hypothesis. So a hypothesis is an educated guess. You take what you know and you apply it to try to answer a question like, what was this object for? And then after that, archaeologists collect evidence. So this is probably the most important part. They have to actually get the evidence to back up what they think might be true. And so archaeologists collect evidence in lots of different ways. The main way that we tend to think about is digging, right? They go to a site, they're digging things up, but archaeologists also spend a lot of time looking in libraries. They look at artifacts people have already dug up. So we today will not be looking at an ancient site, unfortunately, because we can't all be together, but we're going to be using these principles to conduct an archaeological investigation in our own homes. But before we do that, I just want to show you some stuff here from an actual archaeological dig that the OI did in this place called Megiddo that's right here near modern day Israel. So this is a site that we have a gallery for, but we actually dug here in the 20s and 30s. So you can see some archaeologists down here, they're working in trenches. And we've got, I love this picture because you can see how the sites that they're digging up ancient homes. So you can see these walls here and all these pots and things like that. And they even have this kind of ruling stick so they can tell from the photograph how big the site was. And another cool thing about sites like Megiddo is that they are called a tell. So a tell is a man-made hill that is formed over thousands of years. So these are pretty common in the ancient Middle East. They are formed when people live on the same spot over thousands and thousands of years. And somebody said, yes, that Megiddo is the site purported for Armageddon. So this is where the penultimate battle for good and evil is supposed to take place. So you might have heard of the word Armageddon before. But a lot of people lived here, and when you live in a mud brick house, over time, your house will maybe collapse. Maybe it'd take 100 years, but it'll collapse and it'll get covered over with sand. And as time goes on, and more people move onto that site, it's going to keep getting bigger and bigger until it's like this big layer cake. And so when archaeologists dig at these types of sites, they dig down layer by layer so they can look at all the different levels of civilization there. So probably when you're doing your archaeological investigation at home, you're not going to be digging through layers and layers of stuff unless you have a really messy bedroom. Then maybe you might have a top layer and a bottom layer there. All right. So after archaeologists collect evidence, then they will analyze data. So they're going to take everything they observed and try to bring it together to understand it. And then they're going to draw conclusions. So that's where they're going to come back to their hypothesis and see what they learned. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing now. We'll come back together. So this is where we're going to switch gears and think about archaeology, how we can practice archaeology in our own homes. So we're going to be pretending that we're archaeologists today. And there's kind of two approaches to this. If you want, you can say, I know what everything is in my house, but I'm still going to look at it like an archaeologist. I'm going to, think critically about it, make lots of observations. Or if you want to make it a little more interesting, you can imagine that you're an archaeologist 1,000 years in the future, maybe an alien archaeologist, and you're finding things that you have no idea what they are, just like archaeologists sometimes do today with ancient artifacts. So you're going to have to really figure out what these things are and how they can help you answer your question. All right, so I'm going to show you an example of an archaeological investigation that I did in my house, because we're all in front of our computers. We can't all run off and do this together. But then after this program, you can go and take your archaeology notebook out into your home and find a spot to investigate. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. We'll go to this. All right, so first you're going to pick a site. So this is the site that I picked in my house. It's a spot in my living room. And I picked out just a square site, and that is going to correspond to my notes sheet. So you'll fill out your name and then you'll put the location. So my location would be living room, Chicago. And then my time period would be maybe July 2020. And then my research question. So this is where you get to decide what you want to look into. So I'm really interested in how people lived in their day-to-day lives. So I'm going to ask my research question as, what was daily life like in July 2020? And then I'm going to make a hypothesis. So this is where you make your educated guess. So I'm going to say that life, let's say in July 2020, is pretty fun. Maybe that's my hypothesis. We'll see if it's true. All right, and then you're going to move into this section. But before you get started with your site, you're going to first divide it into quadrants. So I just used some string here to divide it into roughly 4 parts. So that's going to help me map out where I find things. And before I pick out an object to investigate, I'm going to draw it on the map where it is in the quadrant. So this, you don't have to follow along with this right now. This is just an example that you'll then take this, pick a spot in your house and do this on your own. So the first object that I would pick, I'm going to say, is that big blue rectangle. So I'm going to pick that as my object. And once you've sketched your object, you can pick it up, and then you're going to fill out this chart on the bottom. So the first thing for my blue rectangle, the quadrant, sorry, my paper's disappearing. The first thing is the quadrant. So I would put it in quadrant A, that's in the top left. and then I would measure it. So I have my artifact here, measure it in centimeters like an archaeologist, write down my measurements, and then I'm gonna write the material. So this is pretty soft. I think it's probably made out of foam. It's kind of firm, but a little squishy. And then you'll write some observations about your artifact. So what do you see? What do you observe from it? So I might say that this is blue. It is rectangular. It has rounded corners. It's pretty lightweight. And then finally, you'll ask, how might this object relate to my research question? So what could this tell me about daily life? So maybe I know this is a yoga block. So I'd say, okay, maybe this person did yoga. Maybe that was what this tells us about daily life. And maybe that's fun. But if I'm looking at this as an alien or an archaeologist way in the future, maybe I might think this is a toy for a kid because it's colorful, it's big, it's soft. Or maybe I'm usually working in the ancient world, and I think this looks kind of like a mud brick from Mesopotamia. So these are bricks that kings would use to build palaces. They would have their names stamped on them to, leave a record of who built the building. So maybe King Gaiam used this as a brick to build a building, and maybe this doesn't tell me much about daily life at all. So you'll go through and do that on your sheet. And then once you've done about 4 objects from your site, you will go on the back, and I will stop sharing now. Take a look on the back of this sheet. I'm really disappearing here now. There's some more boxes. If you really want to keep going, you can do as many objects as you like. And then there's some questions for you to think about. You don't have to write the answers, but just think about them. Was your hypothesis correct? How can you expand on that? What else did you learn? So you can kind of fill that out and think about your spot. So this is for you all to do on your own. I know we have a couple more minutes here. So just a couple things about picking a site in your house. I would say any spot that you can do a square is perfect. If you want to go in somebody else's space, that's fine. Just make sure you ask permission first. Just like an archaeologist would when they're digging in a different country, you have to ask before you dig. So make sure you ask before you investigate, your sibling's bedroom or something like that. You could also take this outside and do it in your backyard and ask any questions that you want. And I have somebody asking, was I supposed to print something? So there is this sheet that I think Charlie put in the chat. Let's see, that I'll put here again. If you want to print it, you can. You can also just look at it online and then create your own sheet on your own. So you don't have to print it out if you don't have a printer. All right, so we have a few more minutes. So I'd like to come back to our worksheet, or not our worksheet, our warm-up that we did in the beginning. I know this has been a wild crash course in archaeology here, but go ahead and go back to your worksheet and see if you want to make any changes to it. So I'll pull that up again. And so we had these 2 questions at the beginning. Draw what you think of when you hear the word archaeology, and draw what you think an archaeological site might look like. So take 2 minutes and just think, have you learned anything else about archaeology? What other things might you add to your archaeological site? Maybe your idea of a site has expanded, and then we'll share our answers together. All right, let's see if we have any questions. All right, take maybe 20 more seconds, make your additions. What you think about archaeology. Somebody asked, are we going to talk about gods? So next week, we're doing a myths and magic theme for our workshop. So you can come next week and we'll be talking about some different Egyptian and Mesopotamian gods. All right, so I'm gonna stop my share again. And then if you wanna put in the chat, maybe one thing you added to your sheet, if you added anything to your idea of an archaeological site, or what you think of the word archaeology. I see somebody put a castle and a horse. Maybe, yeah, different types of sites. Important to ask questions and then try to find answers. Yeah, that's great. I know when I first learned about archaeology, I definitely thought dinosaurs too when I was thinking about archaeology, but we talked about humans, right? And living rooms. So there's a lot of differences between dinosaurs and people. And so the people who study dinosaurs are actually paleontologists, and the people who study humans are archaeologists. So no dinosaurs here, but archaeologists and paleontologists do work often in very similar types of situations, which is why they might seem similar. All right, some other questions. Ancient artifacts was added, awesome. Life, okay. Mud walls, yeah, so a lot of times you might think of archaeological sites as really fabulous places like King Tut's tomb, but a lot of times it was pretty average, like my living room, but the living room of an ancient person. They study specific sites, yeah, so they look at a specific place. Awesome. Ancient stuff. All right, so I will challenge you to leave this and go find your site in your house. You just need this or a piece of paper, a pencil, a ruler. My ruler is disappearing. A ruler, and then some string or tape to divide up your site into quadrants. I will see you all next week. Hopefully we'll be doing that myths and magic class on Thursday, again at 1:30 p.m. We'll be talking about different gods and goddesses. So you can tune in for that, and we'll be here every Thursday at 1:30 through the end of August. All right, so thank you so much, and I'll see you next week.
For over 100 years, the OI has been a leading research center for the study of ancient Middle Eastern civilizations. Join us in uncovering the past and learn about the beginnings of our lives as humans together. Become a member by visiting oi.uchicago.edu/member.